everybody, my name is Aaron Green. I'm making a video today to discuss a couple of things, my opinions with regard to the coronavirus, mainly relevant to the UK. I am a UK resident, so a lot of the things in the discussion will be relevant to the UK. However, I will be discussing a few points to do with the global sort of situation and sort of using that to sort of form my arguments when it comes to expressing my opinions about some of these topics. This is mainly just a sort of build up of boredom and sort of I have a few things that maybe I'd like to say and a couple of opinions that I feel like are quite relevant to this, and yeah, it mainly born out of boredom, but I feel like I have maybe a couple of good points to bring to the table when it comes to the whole pandemic and the sort of the government response to it. I think it's important to note that with this, because of the nature of the extraordinary circumstances, everyone is going to have a completely different experience with this, and so it's difficult to almost express an opinion that a lot of people are going to agree with, because everyone has experienced the coronavirus in a very different way. For example, some people may have lost relatives, some people may have relatives that are critically ill, some people themselves may have been critically ill. And so it's important to note that I think a lot of people will have some extreme opinions about certain aspects of this pandemic, but I'm just here today to sort of express my own opinions. It's important to note that everything I discuss is from my perspective, is from my opinion, and so if there's anything that you disagree with me on, if there's anything that maybe you feel like I've missed out an important point, because of the nature of this, there's so much information to talk about that I'm inevitably going to miss something that is quite important. So please drop a comment if there is something you feel like I've missed or something you feel like you disagree with me about, and I'm very, very happy to have a discussion about that in the comments. I think apart from that, I have a couple of things, a couple of points here written down that I'd like to discuss. So I'm going to discuss sort of the early stages of the pandemic and sort of when it was mainly contained in China, the government's response, was it sufficient, etc. Then I'm going to talk about when the UK went into lockdown, the sort of exponential growth of the virus and sort of the government's response when it comes to that. And then finally, I'm going to talk about the exit strategy, sort of the easing of the lockdown measures and social distancing, how soon that's going to happen, etc. A couple of things to take into consideration with that. And then I have a few sort of general notes, a couple of points that I'd like to sort of raise that I think maybe are quite important to consider. So yeah, without further ado, like I say, everything is my opinion. Please don't, I'm not trying to say that everything in this video is factual and that you should believe everything I say. This is merely me just expressing how I feel, my perspective. So yeah, let's go and start with the early stages. So obviously this was something that was contained in Wuhan in China. Something that was known very early on to be very dangerous. It's important to note, I don't have it written down here, but the World Health Organization declared the coronavirus a global emergency on 31st of January 2020. Now, I believe it was something like the 23rd of March when the UK entered its lockdown, the 23rd or might have been the 25th. So there is obviously quite a large time discrepancy between those two dates. But it is important to note that with the World Health Organization, and this is something that I read that is very true, they can advise, but they cannot enforce. So they can only advise governments as to the action to take when it comes to things like hygiene and preventative measures when it comes to coronavirus. But they cannot enforce anything. They can only tell the governments, and then it is then the government's job to enforce that on the public. So with that in mind, was the government's response sufficient in terms of the speed. Were we proactive enough? In a word, I would say no, but then again, with a lot of these things, it's very easy to say that in hindsight. Looking back at it, we should have done something quicker, but at the time, were we to know that it was going to spiral out of control like this? Potentially not. Did the government have that information? Maybe. And that is something that, with what makes this discussion so difficult, is the fact that we don't have all of the information. Inevitably, the government is going to know a lot more about this than we do, and I think I'm going to get on to the sort of my stance on the government sort of withholding information from the public when it comes to coronavirus and sort of how I feel about that. But I think for now, it is very important to know that the government definitely knows more, obviously knows more than we know about this virus. So was the response sufficient enough? I'd say in a word, no. But like I said, with hindsight, it's very easy to say that. I think it's important to note that in the Western sort of developed world, when it comes to Europe and the USA, the UK was one of the later countries to declare a lockdown. We potentially didn't treat it with enough diligence at the start. We obviously had, before the lockdown, I believe it was about a week before, where we had the message from Boris Johnson to stay indoors as much as possible. It wasn't an order. We were encouraged to. We weren't told to. We were encouraged to stay home. So there is a lot maybe to say about should we have been ordered to earlier rather than encouraged to, because inevitably when we are encouraged to do something, we have the ability to not do that. People are going to take liberties with that. People aren't going to appreciate the gravity of the situation when it comes to this, because a lot of times people are so caught up in their day-to-day lives, they fail to see the importance of the bigger picture a lot of the time. And so I think we did go about our normal lives a little bit too much. We weren't diligent enough. And as much as the government is at fault for that, the public needs to take responsibility as well. At the end of the day, I don't believe personally that the government was to know that this was going to spiral this far out of control. And so I believe at the time they were right to advise, not to enforce. Like I said before, I believe that the public needs to take responsibility as much as the government does. At the end of the day, the government, and this has been true even after the lockdown, we've been told to stay indoors, but people don't listen. And for that fact, even though a lot of people are listening, those people need to take responsibility. And unfortunately, that's just an unfortunate circumstance. Like with anything, like I said, people are so caught up with their daily lives, they can't see the bigger picture. They think, oh, the smaller things are more important because it's things I have to deal with every day. People obviously very worried, and rightfully so, about money, going to work, whether they're going to be able to pay their bills, etc, etc. So it is a very difficult time. And when it comes to things like that, when it comes to workplaces, I personally am a university student. When it comes to those institutions that are responsible for a large number of people, I think we need to have empathy and patience with them, because no matter how qualified they are, no matter how good they are at their jobs, no one's qualified to deal with a global pandemic. You know, these situations, this is a once in a generation, once in 2 generations situation. And so I think it's irresponsible of us to put too much pressure on those who are trying to deal with it, because at the end of the day, like I say, they're responsible for a large group of people. They're doing their best to kind of provide the best possible sort of, the best possible situation for those who work for them, for universities, for their students, etc, etc. We've seen a lot of universities waive off rent for 3rd term, etc, etc. Exams being cancelled. A lot of people complaining about exams being cancelled, but at the end of the day, there is no other option. It's not great, and no one wants to see anything like this happen, but at the end of the day, there is nothing else that we can do when it comes to those sorts of things. With this, human life has to take priority. It has to take priority. There is nothing more important than the loss of human life. The economy is not more important than human life. the education system is not more important than human life. This has to take priority. And that sort of leads me to another sort of point, as I said before, about the government sort of being criticised for withholding information from the public with regard to coronavirus and some of the details surrounding it. I think the way in which the government are approaching this at the moment is the correct way to go about it. I'm of the belief personally that if the government was to tell the public everything that they know, if they were to give all of the information that they have to the public, that can only be a bad thing. We saw with pre-lockdown, we saw a lot of panic buying when sort of the prospect of the pandemic being in the UK was becoming very real. We had sort of a period of about a week, maybe 2 weeks, where there was very little fresh food, very little toilet roll, very little hand sanitizer in the big supermarkets. And so I believe personally that if the government was to hand out all of the information with regard to time frames for things like social distancing and things like that, if they were to give those out now, I believe that it would only cause panic and scaremongering. And I believe that the way that, although it is important and the government has a duty to tell the public about this and all of the points about this, we need to consider that people are going to use that information the wrong way. We already see it. It's very easy, more so than normal, to sort of get bogged down in misinformation about these things, because there is so much information. Everyone is reporting about it. You know, there's so many different stories coming out, so many conflicting stories. It's very easy to get bogged down, read every article that you see on social media and sort of, you know, believe everything you hear. And it is an unfortunate sort of, it is just sort of an unfortunate reality of what's going on at the moment. But I think it is important to know that a lot of people would not be able to handle all of the information. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think, you know, some people are more inclined to panic about things than others, and that doesn't make them a worse person. That's just a characteristic of their personality. And I think a lot of people would panic, and I think on the whole, the response and the atmosphere within the country would take a negative hit, in my opinion. I want to stress that, in my opinion. With regard to something that a lot of people have been sort of criticising the government with, is testing. We should have tested more, we should have been proactive, and I agree. But like I said, we need to be patient and empathetic with the fact that it's so easy to say these things in hindsight. The government has ramped up testing as of today. As of recording this, it's the 1st of May 2020. The government has severely ramped up testing. I think given the circumstances, they're doing an excellent job with that. Should we have done it earlier? Yes, probably. We should have. But I think once that fact has been established, we've established that fact, we need to support the government, because the only way in which these things are going to work is if we comply with the government. And I think another thing that's been coming out recently is sort of obviously with Boris Johnson having the birth of another child very recently. We've had all the personal stories coming out about him cheating with his wife and things like that. That's not necessary at the moment. It is important to consider that, but not now. There are things at the moment that are more important than these things, and we need to prioritise. Like I said, we need to prioritise the preservation of human life, because that is the most important thing. You know, whilst these news outlets report on Boris's personal life, they could be doing something. They could be volunteering, helping with the NHS. They could potentially be saving a life, and so that is what we need to prioritise. Going back to testing, I think, like I said, we are doing a better job now. I believe it was on the 31st of April, they did set a target of 100,000 tests a day. However, I believe it was around about 88,000, something like that, that they conducted on the 31st of April. Whilst they haven't hit their target, they have done a very, very good job. And I do believe, whilst a lot of people may not like the government, I think we need to consider that they are doing their best and that they are trying to solve this, because, you know, no matter what anyone says about the kind of intentions of a government, and whether you are potentially someone who swings more to Labour and there's currently a Conservative government, at the end of the day, these people, they're human beings. They do not want to see people die, and that is the most important thing, is that they are trying to help people. They are trying, and there's a lot of things coming out about, you know, if there wasn't so many NHS cuts in the past sort of 10 years, then we would have more capacity to deal with that, and that could be true. But at the moment, that's not what we should be focusing on. We should be focusing on dealing with this, and then maybe potentially down the road we can look at holding them responsible. But at the moment, our priority has to be getting through this. So I think one other thing, a recent news story, I believe it was either 31st or 30th of April, was the fact that the pharmaceutical company AstraZeneca, or however you say that, has partnered with the human vaccine testing that's going on at Oxford University as a sort of vessel to mass produce a vaccine if it's found to be successful. That's obviously only good news. They came out and said that, I believe it was around June or July, that they said that they would know whether it's effective. I think obviously that's good news, but we need to be slightly prudent in the fact that the way they worded it was they would know whether it has been effective. So that could mean that it isn't effective, and they only know by that time frame. I know that with regard to these sort of situations, we need to be optimistic, but it is also, we need to consider all eventualities and possibilities with things like that. So, but on the whole, that story is a very positive thing, and it shows that, like Boris Johnson said in his address last night, that we are sort of getting on the other side of this. We're past the sort of peak of it. So let's sort of move on to the exit strategy now. Sort of the easing of the lockdown. I believe personally that the government's going to go with a similar approach to a lot of the other European countries, in terms of sort of almost like a traffic light system. Some things will open first, and then gradually, as time goes on, they'll look at the figures, and then when they deem it suitable to open other things up, then they will do so. So things like, I believe schools will be relatively soon to open up. Obviously education is something that they want to prioritise. I believe that is very, very important. So things like schools will reopen. A weird example, something that affects me personally, golf courses will open. Things where social distancing can be applied relatively easily, those things will open up. Potentially we'll see a reopening of, I believe, public places in terms of restaurants, but maybe at a reduced capacity. I believe it's France, I think it was, that said that bars, restaurants, things like that will be able to open at a capacity of 30%. There was a story about potentially pubs reopening with a limit of 2 to 3 pints per person. Not sure whether that's going to happen. Obviously that's relatively difficult to enforce. So yeah, one thing I will say as well, something that I did forget to bring up with regard to lockdown, I don't believe that the lockdown that we were put under was strict enough. I feel like, although obviously physical exercise and activity is important, it has been said by quite a few people, quite a few reputable sources, that running and jogging is the biggest spreader of coronavirus, that it can survive in the earth up to, I believe it's 3 hours. And so I don't feel like we should have been allowed the 1 hour of exercise a day. That's something that I think a lot of people may disagree with me about, but I believe that would have curbed the spread a lot more than if it was in place. A lot of other countries have been put in a much more strict lockdown. But yeah, it's tricky to say whether it would have helped, because obviously we don't know. But yeah, that was one thing I did want to bring up. So getting back to the easing of the lockdown, I think a lot of people are hearkening for the government to ease it now. Yesterday, when Boris gave his address, he said we and he made a very good point. We can't undo all the hard work that we've done. There's no point us jumping the gun, easing lockdown early, seeing a second spike in infection, and then going straight back to square one, where we were. We've seen it with Germany. I believe personally that they've slightly jumped the gun with the easing of the lockdown. They've opened quite a lot of things, museums and things like that. They're all open, zoos, those public places, and they have seen a rise in infections again. I'm not sure. I haven't seen much about it in the past sort of few days, but I believe they were considering a second lockdown at one point. So that's maybe a good case study to sort of say, we can't be too eager, we can't jump the gun, we need to be diligent with these things. If people are patient, and at the end of the day, it's going to get solved quicker. There's no point us relieving lockdown now and then the rate of infection goes back up. We've sort of put ourselves 2-3 months back in the timeline. When we've already gone through so much. A lot of people obviously struggling with the lockdown in terms of their mental health. To then have that happen again, that would affect a lot of people in terms of students, starting of a new school year. That would affect that, and a lot of people would be negatively affected by that, of course. So I believe that we are correct. I think some lockdown measures will be eased on the 6th of May, the Thursday. I believe some will be eased, but I believe things like masks will be made mandatory on things like public transport, and then also I believe social distancing as a concept will still be in force until deep into the summer at least, because like they mentioned, we need to stop its infectivity, and if social distancing is abolished and everyone, because inevitably if they were to ease everything at once, everything's reopen, guys, go have fun, everyone's going to go crazy with it, everyone's going to go stupid, everyone's going to gather in big numbers, and that is just a breeding ground for spreading the disease. So we can't jump the gun, we can't be too impatient with it. We need to be diligent in terms of easing the lockdown, because we can't do all the hard work that we've done. I think on the whole, globally, it appears that we're past the peak of infection. Hopefully we are. Hopefully we don't see a second spike in infection. With regard to the vaccine trials, we can only hope that those are successful and that we can mass produce and manufacture a vaccine for this as soon as possible. There have been some sources that suggest that it could last for 18 to 24 months. I don't personally believe it will be that long. I think that in some form it could last well into 2021. Maybe and especially in potentially countries that are less developed economically, and countries perhaps like India, where they have a very high population, a very dense population, where it's a lot more difficult to enforce something like social distancing. Maybe those countries unfortunately are going to suffer slightly more in the coming sort of months. But hopefully things start to look up. They have started to look up recently. There is a light at the end of the tunnel, I believe, with these things. And hopefully, as soon as possible, this will be something that we can laugh about, and obviously something that we can tell our kids for many years to come. So if you've got this far, thank you very much for listening to me rambling a lot. Like I said, mainly out of boredom, but just a couple of things that I'd like to just share my opinions about. Like I said at the start, if you have anything that you sort of disagree with, pop it in a comment. If there's anything that you think I've missed, anything important maybe that you like my opinion on, again, drop it in a comment. Yeah, I'd personally like to say thank you to the NHS. Obviously they don't need they don't need my thanks. They know just how amazing they all are, how hard they're working. But yeah, it does need saying that they have done a fantastic job, and that goes for every single medical expert, and those who are risking their lives to save people all across the world, not just the NHS but globally. To anyone who is watching this feeling down, stay safe, stay at home, stay strong. Just know that this is something that we will get through, and something that we will see the other side of. And I believe that when it comes to things like not seeing your friends, that being apart for so long, that means that when eventually we do have the ability to see each other again, it's going to make everything a lot better. I think we'll have a greater appreciation for the smaller things that we have, and I think as a whole, hopefully we can use this to have a little bit more compassion and empathy towards other people and their situations and everything like that. But otherwise, thank you very much for watching. I hope you're staying safe. All the best to you and your family, and I will hopefully see you